Hello and welcome back to Breathe More. I am excited for today's episode because it's a little different. I feel like a lot of people don't know, but I actually work with a lot of men. With how I speak of my work, I have never just focused on a certain gender. However, this work tends to attract a lot of women. But I am so grateful that from the beginning, when I started holding space for folks 9 years ago, I would have men show up at my circles. And they tend to be who I work with one on one because then they get a little shy showing up and it being full of women. But I always tell like the single men, I'm like, if you're looking to date, like come to these healing circles, come join us. There's a lot of amazing women there. But, anyways, for today's episode, I invited a dear friend and client, Mike De La Rocha, to have a conversation about men's mental health because this is something that I don't see being talked about a lot publicly. I feel like some people are doing the work behind the scenes, but in general, there's still a really big stigma. And yes, while I work with men, I work with a lot of women, and they tell me what's going on in their household. And there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of frustration. Women and men just tend to communicate differently. And so there's a lot of things that are missing or things that aren't said that think are being said. And so I'm grateful that I kind of get like the behind the scenes look of like what's going on with different genders and how can we support them. And men are really struggling right now as well. The whole world is. I have seen it from my dad, coping with his mental health with alcohol. And that has gotten me thinking as well. It's like, wow, especially growing up, being Mexican American, thinking of my tios in Mexico and how they cope with stress. And there really is not any conversation about it. It's just labeled as like, oh, tu tío toma, your uncle drinks. Like, that's it. Not like, well, why? Why does he drink? Why is my dad drunk? What is going on? And so here we are, Mike, to talk about this and so much more. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, no, thank you. Here we are.
Here we are. Let's go back in history. So you discovered my work during the pandemic when I was offering the community gatherings. I believe our friend Ana Flores put out a blast or something. I feel like that's how we connected. Two amazing founders of companies.
It was definitely spirit driven. And I will definitely say, hopefully, other folks that don't listen to Breathe More podcast will listen to this. Because if you are, I want you to know that I had the privilege and honor of meeting Ana Lilia through these community gatherings almost 5 years ago. And since then, you have been an instrumental part of my own growth and development, like you were talking about earlier. And so, if anyone's looking for that partner and breakthrough coach, this is the biggest plug that my heart could give for the one and only Ana Lilia. So I just want to say thank you before we even start the conversation for the role you're playing in my family's life and my personal life. So thank you.
No, thank you, Mike. Yeah, speaking of family, so we connected in community gathering, and then from there, you invited me to hold space for your employees. So Mike and his partner, his wife own an amazing company. And during pandemic, we were all stuck behind our screens and people were just struggling. A lot of companies like Mike's organization saw like the need for their employees to get some support. And so I came in as well and facilitated. And then a couple years after that, after your wife, Claudia, who's amazing, started working with me one on one, then you were curious to reach out to start working one on one. So, can we talk about what inspired you to reach out? Like, was there anything that you were seeing maybe in Claudia that was like, oh, maybe that could help me too? Or like, yeah, what made you finally decide to reach out?
Actually, now that you brought up, because I forgot about the all staff healing session, I think there were two things if I'm reflecting back. One, as I was in the process of writing my dad's book at the time. And then when you did that healing session, since we're talking about men's mental health, there's a few of us men in a predominantly all women of color driven company. But I remember one of the men was profusely crying during and after that session. And I have a good relationship with him. And it struck me that this was a healing modality that I needs to like lean into more because this is a man that's not typically known to be as outwardly emotional and vulnerable like that. So, and to be able to do that virtually on is not only a gift, but it was like a portal for me. Like, wow, I need to like dig deeper into my own self, but also like I want to be in this space if you had that much of an impact in a 45-minute session. So I think it was those two things. It was just the convolution of where I was in my own journey, as well as like being in that space.
So let's talk about this book. I feel like that has been such a huge part of your healing journey as well, just reflecting on your ancestors, your upbringing, the programming you've inherited. So, what are you learning as you're navigating this journey of being an author now?
I think context is really important. So I'll probably start with that. I'm a mama's boy through and through. However, a lot of the way I see the world and how I organize, I inherited from my father. So my father immigrated from Chihuahua, Mexico at the age of 7 to Boyle Heights and became very instrumental in the Chicano movement. And from a young age, he took me to every kind of movement space you could think of. He was a community college professor. And I'm saying all this because I had a very deep relationship with them. And then almost 10 years ago, he unexpectedly passed away. He went in for their back surgery and he never recovered from it. And in that process, it forced me to confront like the deepest grief I've ever had, but also like, what did I inherit from my father? And how was I passing that on to my own children? And one of the things that struck me was that he loved me and my biological brother, my brother Albert, more than life itself, but didn't have the words to express that. It was so difficult for him to say, mijo, te amo, or I love you. And so then that just led me down this rabbit hole of trying to understand why was it so hard for the men all around me to be able to express vulnerability or ask for help. And so I actually started writing his books. I felt there's so many of these unknown heroes and sheroes in history that aren't acknowledged for the sacrifice and contributions they make. So I was writing a book from his voice, got an incredible agent, went out to market, but people didn't want that book. They wanted like my story. That's actually when I met you because I was hiding behind his voice because I didn't do that deep work of uncovering, you know? And so the book's called Sacred Lessons, Teaching My Father How to Love. I would say next to my children is my greatest gift to the world. It's as naked as I could be. And my hope is that the story allows other folks to see themselves in it so that we have the ability to ask for help. Because ultimately, I feel like the weight of patriarchy, my father's inability to be emotionally vulnerable and ask for help led to his premature death. That's what I believe in my heart. So
Thank you so much for sharing. I think the fact that you are so vulnerable and you do create that safe space for folks around you, like everybody in your life, to open up is what we need. And I'm so excited for this book. I think so many of us are going to be able to relate to it. As I mentioned in the beginning, like my dad, very similar. Like he grew up not receiving any affection from his parents, being in constant survival mode, and him being a sensitive soul that everything is just amplified so much was overwhelming, but without having the tools or in the understanding or the comfort from his parents, the safety to let him know, like, that's okay, or that doesn't mean you're weird, or like, we got you, we're safe. He never had that. And so, as a way that he coped, again, it was through the alcohol. And still to this day, like, he's sober now, but even him being our parent and my father and my mom being the opposite of just, like, being so affectionate and, like, physical and always saying, "I love you," and she was mirroring to him, like, "Okay, you're telling me that you didn't get that, so you don't know how to, but I'm showing you now, like, you can do that with your daughters." And he still struggles with that. You know, the way that I always look forward to my birthday card because that's one thing, like, even thinking about it gets me emotional. I can see how much time and effort and love goes into picking that card and then the message he writes in it. And so for me, it's like, okay, that's my dad being vulnerable. That's my dad saying, like, I love you. I'm proud of you, even though he doesn't know how to or feel comfortable or safe or like a man. Like, how does a man do that? And so through your book, Sacred Lessons, through more men like yourself embarking on a healing journey and then talking about it, because that's the other thing too, right? Where, okay, some men do this healing work, but most don't. And then the ones that do, like, do you guys talk about it? Like, do you behind like with your buddies, like, are you guys telling each other like, "Oh, with my therapist, this is what I'm talking about?" Because I know women do.
Well, first, I just want to say thank you for sharing that story about your dad. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot packed into that because similar to you, my father's scribbly handwritten cards were the things I cherish the most now. I think men are starting to, but I think we've been conditioned and live in this society that really, I would say, disconnects men from them true selves. And so the irony of this like kind of lie is that men are searching for a sense of connection and vulnerability with each other. And there's just so many social pressures and norms. I would say exactly like you said, a lot of the time when I do connect with other men, it is over alcohol. It is over, and I'm intentionally trying to do and both because I know there's doorways to all of it, you know. But I do think there is a change in happening in the world. There's a lot of resistance to it, obviously. You know, there's a political conversation here, but I do think that every righteous warrior, without putting gender on it, has a soft heart. And so I feel right now it's like the calling is how do we soften our hearts to be more compassionate, open to these kind of conversations.
So, speaking of these conversations and just you starting to see some change, like, yes, I agree too, because as I mentioned, I work with quite a few men one on one, and occasionally they drop into my group sessions. But before our conversation, I wanted to get some stats on, like, okay, what is going on in men and mental health? What I came across is that about 60 million men in the US suffer from depression annually. But the majority remain, like, undiagnosed because most men don't go and seek help, right? It's like so I have a feeling that number is a lot higher. When it comes to Latino men, or actually what was interesting is that the stats were just, like, Latinos in general, not specifically via gender, and I'm like, "Yeah, because they don't study us." Ah, this is why over 20% of Latino adults experience some sort of mental health conditions such as anxiety, depression, PTSD. And it's no wonder. I mean, if y'all are anything like the experience that my family has had, where first they came to this country like illegally and then got citizenship, have experienced racism, poverty, like, yeah, there's so much trauma there that we've experienced just in this generation, not to mention previous generations. And then with that as well, suicide rates. So men represent 80% of all suicides in the US, and Black men are 4 times more likely to die by suicide than Black women. And I think these stats, like, show a lot, right? I think it's obviously a very complex problem, but part of the work that both Mike and I are doing, Mike through his book and just being the amazing human that he is, and then me through holding space is like, we need more people, especially men, to seek out support, to say, I'm struggling, to say, this pressure of providing for my family, it's killing me. Like, it's keeping me up at night. It's hurting my heart. It's making me seek support or like soothe with these other things that maybe aren't healthy. Because the way that these systems and also just the expectations and the roles of these different genders and for women as well, like, it is not sustainable. We need community, we need each other, we need healing, and we need things to change. What are your thoughts on this, Mike, and the stats?
Yeah, I mean, the stats are overwhelming. And then, 40% of men have never spoken to anyone about their mental health. And so I think right now, more than anything, I feel called to just help normalize asking for help. And I was really thinking deeply. It was like, well, what would be like the three, if you're going to ask me, like, what is my hope and dream? It's really around like three concepts, which you touched on. One is just connection, community, and culture. On the connection tip, I just feel like so many less men feel like we're the only ones. We feel alone. And so this sense of loneliness is an epidemic. I mean, the Surgeon General has even stated, man, the feelings of loneliness is leading to these suicide ideations that you're talking about or attempted suicides. The second is just around community is I feel like a lot of us are just searching for a non-judgmental space to come with our full selves and knowing that the spectrum of learning is always like fluid. And I feel there's a lot of shame and judgment around it. And so just creating that safe container, that brave container. And then the last thing is just the cultural piece. Another thing that's been immensely powerful in my own journey has been remembering and learning Mesoamerican, indigenous African healing rituals, traditions, what have you. And just the simple reminder of the power of just being outdoors in nature. The disconnect from the cosmos and the land is so deep and profound. So a lot of this, all this medicine is free and it's embedded in our DNA. It's in our cultural practices and traditions. And so my hope is that in terms of like just praying that men find these paths and however they come to it will help lessen the violence that we're seeing in our homes, in our country, in our world. Because so much of it is rooted in this kind of like white patriarchal violence that's
A lot of my listeners, especially to this podcast, are women. So, for those who are in relationship and partnership, how can they best support their men? Because I feel like the messaging out there is so conflicting. It's like there's a part of us that still is like, okay, the men are the provider, they're, the ones protecting our family, all of these traditional roles. And then at the same time, we want them to be our best friend. We want them to talk about their feelings. We want them to help out with, I don't know, taking care of the kids or maybe more of like the domestic chores, if you will. But then at the same time, I know that I've heard women say, like, get annoyed, like when their partner or someone that they know, a man, like gets emotional, right? It's like, oh, it's such a turn off, especially with women, becoming alphas, like being educated, having an amazing career, having the family as well. Like they're so in their masculine that I think that as well has created some confusion or like maybe for men wondering like, well, where do I fit in now? And the questioning, the depression, and it's like, okay, I'm still women want their independence and want this. Let me be supportive of that. But then I'm not being man enough. Like I'm just seeing as a woman, I'm seeing it, right? Like all these conflicting messaging. So I'm just wondering for you, like, what advice or how can women who are in a relationship best support the man so that y'all feel safer? Like what's needed, basically? Tell us.
a
I
loaded
know.
question.
You are representing all men right now.
Ah,
Tell us,
uh,
how do we help you?
I a couple things that I think was that were resonated that you were talking about is my hope is that we have a conversation around energy more than gender because I feel like you touched on it. We're a mix of both masculine and feminine, and we need that duality in order to be centered. And I feel in our society, it's really challenging for at least cis straight men to embody our feminine energies that we all have, right? I also think that we're also living in a day and age where it has been traditionally, manhood has been traditionally defined as being the provider and the protector. And we're living in a time of radical change and transformation in the economy, in society. And so all these things are making a lot of us, at least myself, like question, well, what defines being a man? And so for me, I'm trying to be like, well, reframing the question is like, what does it mean to be a good person? What does it mean to be a good partner? What does it mean to be a present parent? And I think those kind of questions for me have allowed me to not fall into traps of stereotypes of what a man or a woman should traditionally do or be, you know? I'm incredibly blessed that I have a partner in Claudia that mirrors and challenges me to be a better person every day. And I think some of that is also my, marriage, relationships. It's a daily choice that you make and decisions you make. And so one thing that I would say, I don't have the answer, but I will say grace is something that's coming through right now. Like having the grace in terms of life goes by really fast, but also the healing journey is not linear by no stretch of the imagination. And one of the concepts I really like dig into in my book is that healing can only happen in the context of community. And I feel like we've been sold this lie that like self care is important, but it's enhanced when you're in the outdoors with others that you trust and love. And so I say that because I think you actually started this whole podcast by reminding me it was the courage and bravery of Claudia to step into being in community with you. That model for me, like, hey, I should do that. And women, I'd argue women of color have always been leading men, even though the history was the opposite way. So I think like doing this self work inspires others to think about it. And then you actually in a community of care. I feel like my family is a family of care because we're both growing and learning and healing together and individually.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, it's about energies, but also because I do hold space for these
Mhm.
genders,
Yeah,
I see that it's different language too. And it's
totally.
almost like when I work with men,
Yeah.
it's like teaching them how to communicate what they're feeling.
Yes, exactly.
Because I
Uh-huh.
don't even like, it's going literally down to, like, basics because it's maybe just a sensation. I'm thinking of a specific client, like a physical sensation in the body part, and then it's me guiding them to go a little bit deeper to then name it, and then from there, "When was the first time you experienced this? What was going on?" And then making the connection, the awareness of, like, what they're experiencing right now is still their inner child, back, like, showing up in their life now. So, I think maybe it's helpful when at least someone in the relationship has some awareness or has some of this language to guide. But to your point, like, I know when I started in my healing journey, I was so excited to learn that, oh my gosh, the pain that I've been carrying, the pain that I inherited, the pain that my family still has, like, we don't have to carry that anymore. Like, we can transmute the energy, we can find the gifts in it, we can live life differently. This doesn't have to be our reality if we don't want it to. And so I was really passionate to immediately tell my sisters and even my parents, like, "Oh, go do this. Like, do this. This is going to help you." And it was rejected. They're like, "Stop telling me what to do. Like, I'm going to do my life. There's nothing wrong with me. What are you doing?" They're like, "You're projecting." And so then I learned, I'm like, "Okay, I can't do that. The only thing I can do is do the work for myself and just be an example." And you touched on that, right? It's like you saw that with your wife, and then from there, you're like, "Oh, maybe this can help me as well." And so I think that's step number 1, right? It's like if there's something in your life that feels misaligned, that's causing you stress, that you've outgrown, do the work for you. And then you have so much power in creating a disruption in the pattern that you have with your loved ones. So, for example, if we're talking about Mike, it's like, okay, now that he has some tools and a different language and more awareness, he can show up in any room radiating that, speaking even differently, maybe with a friend that you guys tend to have a certain dynamic. It's like, Now, instead of like getting immediately reactive and getting defensive, maybe you're asking the question, hey, what's really going on? And just by you showing up differently, you're creating a disruption in the normal, maybe unhealthy pattern. You're allowing healing to happen without them having to go to a therapist or work with a healer or do some breath work or anything. Like, just because you have done it and you're showing up energetically also differently, and then also have some words or way of speaking differently, like it's a ripple effect. But it starts with us. So whether you're a man or a woman or any gender, like, I guess that's our invitation, right? If there's something that you feel within yourself that's hurting, that isn't supporting where you want to be or how you want to show up or how you want to interact, we invite you to go inward, to show up in community, and to do this beautiful work because it is life changing. Again, not just for you, but for everyone around you.
Yeah, I mean, two things I was going to say is I think you're to build off of what you just said. I think it's also being attuned to your own compass and finding your tribe so that you're able to be held because it's a back and forth, right? And then the last thing is just that when I lash out, or a lot of men that I know lash out, it's more of a cry for help than, our anger is some type of gift that hasn't been like uncovered or addressed. And oftentimes that's definitely, you know, rooted in trauma, generational and childhood trauma coming out. And, that's why subtitled books like Teaching My Father How to Love, because there's an assumption that we do know how to love when the way we've learned has been oftentimes the opposite of what a lot of our partners or folks want. So it really is the basics. We haven't been taught in school or society like the basics, emotional competency and how to express how you're really feeling rather than like being quiet or silent or acting out violently, right? And so I always try to just be compassionate to remind myself when someone's acting a particular way, it's they're asking for something. They just don't have the words and verbiage to do that.
I love it. And so, because we want to encourage other people, especially men,
Mm.
to tap in, to heal, Mike and I are hosting a men's healing circle this upcoming Saturday, December 7th in downtown LA. We're meeting at 9 a.m. and we're going to do a variety of exercises from just holding space for each other to intentional writing. So there'll be a prompt. And it's funny because when Mike and I, when we were discussing, like, okay, what are we going to do at this circle? And I mentioned journaling. I felt like there was a pause from you, Mike. Really, really, we're gonna write. And I'm like, yeah, I think it's important to write. I don't think it's a practice that a lot of men do, but it's such a powerful practice because we're able to get our thoughts out in front of us. And you're a writer, like, like how freaking healing it is. But I think when we describe it as like journaling, that's like, oh, that sounds like girly or like what? I don't know. But anyways, so we are going to do that because again, it's so powerful. And then we're able to start to get some separation between our thoughts and our feelings, get a different perspective when we're actually reading the words versus just being stuck in our head and ruminating and thinking. And then of course we're going to do some breath work and do the somatic healing because I have a feeling a lot of men out there are holding their breath and their bodies holding a lot of tension and maybe even physical pain. And so to allow those unprocessed emotions like the anger, the rage, the grief, the sadness, the stress, the worry, all of it to start to move from out of their body and yeah, releasing it. And then regulating the nervous system, which is really important so that we don't have these blowouts, and then come back and talk about it. So I can't wait. I'm so looking forward to it. There is limited space, so please tell the men in your life to join us. We would love to host them, to hold space for them and share more about, just be in community and have these conversations, not over alcohol, not over whatever, just in a space with a lot of love and support and safety and confidentiality.
Yeah, I was going to share because you said a lot of your listeners are predominantly women. And it's very, very hard for a lot of us men to take that step. And so my invitation is for those just to be curious, take a small leap of faith. But what I've realized with the book, the writing, and even this, Anna, is that a friend of mine, and she DM'd me and said, "Hey, this is predominantly men of color, and is it okay if my brother goes?" And I said yes to both. And I've realized that, to your question of the relationships and the conversation with women, I think one beautiful gift that you could give is a ticket to this. And I'm not saying that to sell the tickets, but I'm saying that I think that men that show will be incredibly surprised and grateful to see other men in different parts of their journey, but other men that reflect questions or tensions that they may be having. And my hope is that they walk away with at least one connection that they didn't have before going in, because that one connection will potentially like transform their life. And then the practices from the writing to the breath work will also be another tool that they can have to regulate in moments of stress or moments of uncertainty. And so I want to just love as many people as I possibly can. And right now, I feel like my ashe has to be targeting men so that they're reminded of how beautiful they are. And I think this container hopefully will be one of many. So,
Yay, I love it. Can't
yeah.
wait. So tell your partners, your husbands, your brothers, your sons to join. Like, we can't wait to see them on Saturday, December 7th in downtown LA. Click in the show notes to sign up. And then also make sure you click in the show notes to pre order Sacred Lessons. It's such an amazing book. Tell us, when is it coming out, Mike?
So it comes out June 3rd of next year, right before Father's Day. Pre orders can go now anywhere you buy the independent bookstore if you so choose, or any other outlet. But gift it, gift it. There's another thing. You could gift this, but also read it to help understand at least one man's journey, one of many. They're all different, but I think there's some common stories in between all of it.
And pre orders are very important in the publishing world
They
because it
are.
allows more writers like Mike,
Mm.
right? More Latino men, more just like diversity to get more book deals. So please do so. We encourage that.
Yes.
And yes, thank you everyone for listening. Well, I love listening or hearing from you. Please let me know if this episode resonated. And we look forward to seeing you at the event and then also connecting with you next week on the next episode. Have a great week.